Sweet. Jared, thanks for doing this, buddy.
Yeah, absolutely, John.
So like I was just saying, I'm someone who is particularly design challenged. So I enjoy when people put effort into the design, and Figma is kind of one of those things that like somebody like I know Bubble and how to navigate and design things in Bubble, but I'm not as comfortable doing that in Figma. I played around with it, but I haven't really built anything useful. So, like the first thing kind of on my mind is like, what are the advantages to building in Figma first over just designing something in Bubble?
Yeah, I think as far as advantages, for me, the biggest advantage, I guess, is going to be flexibility and speed, right? So we use Bubble because we can iterate and quickly build upon ideas, right? But if you just take a trip through the forum, you're going to notice that people can't do that on their ideas as it relates to design specifically. There's always these questions about how do I get this flex setting, or why, how do I get my how do I get it to look a certain way? And I think that is because while it's easy to copy a design a little bit in Bubble, it's not as easy to start with your design. And like Gio's saying, design first, development second. And I mean, that's a really great point. So that is one reason, right? It's because it's just easier to design for me in Figma. Especially after the change where we moved away from the drag and drop engine and we're on this responsive engine now. I think that as far as designing, it's a lot easier to design in a drag and drop environment. Mostly because like that's, your mind doesn't typically paint pictures in a scaffolding way.
Yeah, like align to parents and does this need to be a row column, that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, right. Like in our minds, we have pictures. Unless you've been doing it for a while, and fair enough, there's going to be people who I'm sure think in scaffolding ways. But a lot of us, if you're not, if you're new to the design world, if you're new to web development, you're not used to this idea of thinking in a scaffolding pattern. Is this going to shrink or expand, right? So we have pictures in our mind, and I think that that's where Figma comes in really handy, because you can just place placeholders, for example, to start roughing out those designs. Now, I don't do any fine design. I do a lot of like wireframes and rough design in Bubble, and I hand that off to a designer when it's ready. And so that brings me to point two. Now I want to share my rough designs with somebody else because I'm not a designer and I can recognize that. I can't hand my Bubble project to you. I'm not on an agency plan. You're not on an agency plan because you're not a Bubble developer. You're just a designer. So how do we share collaboratively, right? And again, that's where Figma comes in handy. Figma, I can send you my .fig file. You can open it in your Figma. You can modify it. You can send it back to me. You can't do that with Bubble projects. And that can be quickly done, right? I don't have credentials. I don't have to pay extra to get you onto my account.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a few things going on there. Just to kind of summarize what you said, it's like a big part is like the collaboration piece, right? And I would imagine even if somebody did have an agency account, or the person who you're showing it to, it's going to be a lot more difficult for them to navigate through a design in Bubble via the editor than it is going to be like in Figma, where it's just all on one page. It's kind of like, all right, I just have to like zoom in and out to kind of see what's going on here, and I can press play when if I want to see how this thing actually navigates. Is that would you say that's like fair for the collaboration part?
Yeah, absolutely. And then, so as far as speed, it just seems to be a lot quicker. You can copy and paste elements a lot easier. You can style elements a little bit. It seems more intuitively, I guess, in Figma for me. It really does come down to speed, though. I can definitely create quicker in Figma. Now, there's a trade-off when you do that, I'd say, right? And it's going to be, well, now I have to come something akin to double working, where I've built it in one place and now I have to build it again in another. Um, that's actually my like lowest complaint ever when it comes to dealing with a Figma design. It's usually like, man, I can't build that in Bubble though. You know, it's not, man, I have to now go from design to Bubble. It's like, oh shit, this design's too cool. I can't make that in Bubble. And I ran into that recently.
Really? Okay, so you're saying that there, like, what you can do in Figma is even like prettier than what you would be able to create in Bubble? That's been your experience?
Well, it's this idea where like Bubble has some hard walls, some places. I could do the example that I have as a focus group. I think some web developers call them some like a flyout, for example, or a focus modal. And in Bubble, a focus group, when you click outside of a focus group, closes the focus group, right? And it's kind of supposed to be that point. It's like, well, you clicked out of the pop-up, so let's close the pop-up because that makes sense. And that's great. And it works like 90% of the time until you put a date picker in that focus group. And now that you have a date picker in the focus group and you go to click on the calendar, your focus group is now clicked out of technically. But you don't want the focus group to close.
Okay.
Right? And so there was this it was like a nice design, you know, we just had to kind of come to a compromise where we used some, I think in like one place we used a pop-up, in another place, yeah, you know, in another place I built a plugin to move the element where we wanted it to a fixed location on the screen so that it appeared to be a focus group, even though it really wasn't. And then in one other third location, we actually just moved elements around on the screen. So we want this focus group, quote unquote, focus group to show up. So then we just move elements out of the way and have it appear as hidden, unhidden.
It sounds like, and this is always the case for me too in Bubble, it becomes like, it's not a question of whether you can do it. The question is whether it's worth it. Like, how bad do you really, like, how do you really need to want to build a plugin because the focus group didn't, you know what I mean? Like, how much extra time does that add for you? And that's probably the frustrating part that a lot of people have. It's like, yeah, you can do it, but it's going to take me this much effort. And it's like, well, you know, like, it was cool in Figma because it was easy, but now that I have to put like 5-6 development hours into this, you know, it's kind of a bummer, right?
Yeah. And I think I like to rant a little bit sometimes about that, kind of to the spirit behind that comment. And if you ever asked a traditional developer to build that for you, it would take far longer than 6 hours,
Sure.
right? He's going to be like, oh man. Or maybe not that, but you know, there's just like certain other aspects where like Bubble development speeds things up so much that for me and my opinion, my personal opinion, when I'm doing client work, if they're willing to pay for it, if they're willing to wait, like hell yeah, let's add this on because it's going to make it sick, you know. And I'd rather have a really dope website or a really dope app than like lesser just because we didn't want to wait a little bit or because I felt like I hit a wall. And it's actually how I got into more traditional coding, was because I kept hitting walls in Bubble, and I was like, man, I want to do more, but Bubble doesn't allow us. So like, let me learn JavaScript and I can just build a plugin.
So that's interesting. So you started like your introduction to software development and technology was Bubble, and then you expanded out into, you know, like more traditional coding, JavaScript, CSS, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So I started with Thunkable, mobile app development during grad school. It's awesome software, but web development, like Bubble, was just a lot more accessible in terms of like the number of apps I could create and how quickly I could get people to get them, to testing them and getting into them. You don't have to publish it to the app store. You know, you can just click publish and people can get on. Yeah. And then, so I believe I tried to recreate the app that I built in Bubble, or sorry, I tried to recreate the app I built in Thunkable in Bubble, and I started hitting brick walls when you start dealing with like lists of information and trying to deal with that sort of thing. And it was like, well, you can do this in JavaScript, you can do this in block language. Like, why can't I just do this in Bubble? So I said, forget about it. I'm going to learn JavaScript. I've always had this mentality that when there's a challenge, I'm going to overcome it, but kind of by like no no matter what means necessary. So
Fair enough. Yeah. Do-it-yourself mentality.
yeah.
Geo here, he's got a question. You can't build fully custom calendar UI in Bubble either. A fully custom calendar UI.
Calendars are a hard thing to deal with. There's a lot of moving components. I think that if you put all the time and effort in, months, who knows, you might come
Well,
up with like a fully usable calendar component. I think that the drop-ins are pretty nice. My calendar plugin is pretty flexible. The one from Zero Code is pretty flexible. I've made some decent like half bubble, half plugin calendars before, just using like a date generator and then repeating groups with drag and drop groups. But yeah, it gets you can't recreate full calendar in Bubble very easily by any means.
yeah, what I tell people, because I see people trying to go down this path sometimes of building their own calendar functionality, and sometimes it might be necessary if you need some really custom functionality. But it's like entire companies like Calendly are built on, like creating a booking system. Why could we recreate that if you can plug into, or not plug into, but use a plugin or integrate the Calendly through like an HTML element? Like why recreate the wheel? There's stuff out there that already does this.
John, that's funny. I actually, I sell the calendar plugin, but I don't use it. I use I use cal.com for my scheduling stuff. I spent so much time learning how to build that stupid plugin and I don't even use it.
Yeah, that's the problem with us builders. I think we kind of get that tunnel vision of like, oh, I have to do this because I started it, and it's like, oh shit, there's better options out there.
Man. I was like, I need this.
Yeah. All right, so back to Figma a little bit.
Yes.
Gio, thanks for joining, man. So you said that you mentioned before that you will build it in Figma and then send it to a designer for their input. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, so I'm like a shit designer. I have good ideas, right? I have like the flow. I'm decent with UX, but when it comes to I'm good with the interface, but and the experience, but when it really comes to like the design, the fine features, like what shading, what border radius, what colors, like, man, I suck at that. And I'm the first to admit it. I tell all my clients, I always apologize up front. I'm like the full shop stop minus your designer. Like, don't let me be your designer. I can't do it. I'll draw you stick figures. And so I actually just did that recently. I've been working with a guy for new designer for like a few weeks now, and I've been rebuilding an app that I've been working on, and I just really didn't like design. It's like a bunch of white pages, with like really simple lists on them or whatever, and I just really want it to be sexy. So I handed him my Figmas, and I was like, "This is where I'm at right now." They're just really rough designs, it's like literally blocks in a phone outline that are there's like notes on it that says this is this. And I'm like, can you just make this sexy for me?
Cool. Okay. See, that is interesting or like useful to me, especially because like I can come up with a crude, Figma design and then give that to somebody who is actually has a design background, and they can add their notes to that way easier than if this was in Bubble already and then I had to give that to them. Then they may be like, what the hell is Bubble, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of the design world is going to be much more readily familiar with Figma or like Adobe XD than they are with Bubble. For sure. Yeah, it's in the world of design, like it is the number one software.
That is that even that piece right there, that like answers a lot of questions for me, because that was the thing. It was like, well, what's going to be the easiest way that I can like get some design feedback on this, and that seems like a reason to do it in Figma first. For me, like someone who's just like kind of played around in Figma a little bit, how long would you say it would take me? Like, how many hours would it take me to pick it up and actually like start being able to create something that looks like moderately pretty, not beautiful, but like something that looks like it was halfway professionally designed?
You know, hours. I think, and that's not because it's a difficult piece of software necessarily, but because it's you know, it just takes time to learn. So I can show you something that I did yesterday, for example, for one of my clients. Oh no, I can't. Let me remove these names really quick, and then I'll do that.
Yeah, no problem. I'm super curious to see like something that you've built. So if you could share your screen and show us something without revealing anything sensitive, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, let me do that real quick. But it's also nice because you with Figma you can add some of the interactions. So you can add like button clicks, but you don't actually have to code anything. You know, so it just comes in handy. Blah blah blah. Yeah. So and then
To that point, I imagine that setting up navigation in Figma might be a little bit faster than in Bubble, like having to add a step in a workflow and sending data somewhere and things like that. All that may not be necessary in the beginning when you're just trying to lay out like a use case or a path for people to react to. I could see why that would be faster. All right, I got your screen. Let me add it here. All right, sweet. We got your screen.
So here's this idea, you know, just of an app. Real straightforward. Looks like you know, and so I was just kind of like talking with my client yesterday, and I started building this out. It's mobile first, so we started on mobile. You know, it's really easy to just plop down a phone screen, and then you know you can just start designing on it. You're like, okay, well, what do we want to call your app? And we want to call it something, and then we want to, you know, oh, that's not big enough, so let's change it. And you know, you get plenty of fonts. I really like Poppins most of the time, sometimes some Railway, you know, and then maybe you're like, oh, well, I need a text input. And you're like, oh, okay, well, let's just put a placeholder here, right? Okay, well, I need a button. Great, let's put a placeholder here. Let's make buttons blue. We'll make text inputs. We'll keep them gray because that makes sense, right? And then, okay, well, what's a button say, right? And so a button has some text here. Okay, awesome. And the thing is that like I don't need it to be perfect right now because again, these are just rough designs, right? So it's like, okay, well now let's go to the next screen. And now I've designed a whole screen.
When you say placeholder, does that mean is that like the name of an element in Figma?
So when I say placeholder, I literally mean like a visual component meant to represent the future actual component. So this box is not a button. Figma doesn't have buttons per se. It's just a box. It's a colored box, and it's a placeholder that is intended to be a button when the app is actually made. Here's placeholder text, for example, right? Just lorem ipsum, some text about the whatever. Here's more placeholders. So this is this idea that when I get to this onboarding screen, I'm going to fill out for my personal information.
Got you. So you're not particularly concerned, and this is why it's faster. I can already see it. You're not concerned with whether you're dealing with an input versus a button versus a container versus text.
Yeah.
It's just a placeholder.
Yeah, not at all. You know, and so it's also nice too. Figma has these nice plugins. Wireframe is one of the plugins I like to use, for example, and it just gives you a lot of like really generic things. So say you want to show like a list of information. Maybe it's not there. Maybe there's one here. Great. I just found a list placeholder. And now when my client's like, okay, I want to have a screen and it's going to have a list on it. And we're like, okay, well, here's like a list that we can use in our, you know, that phone that we were just working on. Right. And so now I've just added a list and I don't have to draw each one of those stinking components, you know, it's just there.
Yeah, that in Bubble, for contrast, that would require like a repeating group, and then you'd have to put some dummy data in there, and then put an image and current sales logo, whatever. Like all of that just amounts to more time.
You know, and sure, maybe the end product doesn't have these buttons, but we can just talk about that. And we say like, hey, don't forget, this is just a placeholder. This is only a list. Don't add the buttons. I believe we could even likely like remove the buttons. If I can. Whoops. You know, but I think it just takes some playing with, and you get used to how it works.
This reminds me a lot of a high fidelity balsamic. Have you ever used balsamic before? It's a basically a wireframing tool. It's a lot simpler than this. It doesn't have as many components, but you can just kind of drag and drop these different visuals on the screen, and it creates a a navigatable experience for somebody to go through. And it looks like Figma just took that to the next level, where it's like, all right, this is actually something that you can put in front of somebody, and they would mistake it for an actual application or website because it's so pretty, right? Like, and whereas balsamic kind of just looked like a wireframe.
Oh yeah, and you can even, so like just kind of like what you're saying there, if you were working with a client, for example, like I said, I'm not a designer, but you know, it's still nice to be able to show them something. And so instead of having to scroll through, what I've already done in this is work out the flow, right? So I'm like, okay, well, I want to log in. When I log in, it takes me to my home page, but maybe I want to click the menu and I want to go add new items. And I save an item and it should take me back to the home screen, you know, stuff like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, in terms of getting this into Bubble, have you ever used the import functionality in Bubble?
Well, one time and it didn't work, and I just never used it again because it's the kind of person I am. Until I used it once, it was really garbage. More power to them for trying. It's really difficult, and I've seen that from like an internal standpoint. When I worked at Thunkable, I remember there being some difficulties with our Figma import at the time, or their Figma import, which is better than Bubbles, by the way. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. It's difficult to bring everything over and have it look the right way.
I found that it's probably it's probably more effort to try and do the import than it is to just rebuild it, because it's not like Bubble will recognize what element you were intending to use there, right? So if you've got like that, you put the placeholder there for a button, Bubble's not going to recognize that as a button. It's going to be like a container with a certain color and then some text over it. You got to just delete that shit and then put a button there and then restyle it. So like, what's the point? Like, why not just rebuild the whole thing? But
Yeah,
I guess that's my question. It's like, say, you've gone to the designer and the designer has given you their notes on it, and then you've taken it to the client. They're like, yeah, we're good to go with this. You then need to go and build that as close as possible in Bubble, working off the Figma design. That's your process, right?
yeah.
Okay.
So when I get something back from a designer, it's kind of like the finished look. And so it's really nice, especially when you're designing, particularly nice when you're only designing for desktop. But when you're designing for mobile, it is also helpful, or still nice. I mean, you can really just, it's great. It's like drop a group. And now let me go back to Figma. One of the things that you can do in Figma is see how far away components are supposed to be from each other. So you truly can create a pixel perfect representation of or pretty darn close to it, pretty pixel perfect representation of your Figma design in your Bubble app because of that feature. So
can you show me that? That's interesting. So it actually will, like, you mean like pixel? It'll give you the pixel.
Yeah.
Between.
So let's see. Control. What's going on? I can make it do it.
I saw that. There it is. Right? Oh, there.
So I don't, on a Mac, you hold down the option button. I'm not sure what it is on a PC. But this would be like, if this is what I got back from my designer, I'd be like, well, that's weird placing, but whatever. Let me make this as wide as the text, because in Bubble, that's what I would set it to be. And then
Sure.
I'd say, okay, I need a margin of 53 on the left, 10 on the top. And now I would first I would make this group that's 235 by 47. Then I would add a text inside the group that's 10 down, 53 over. And now I would have the exact same look. And what I could do is well, I can copy the font size and the font.
Yeah, that makes it a lot easier for Bubble developers if you know exactly what the padding and the margins need to be and what font people are expecting, the colors. Like if you have the hex, does that give you the hex too? Because
Uh,
being
yes.
oh
Yeah.
man, see, being able to copy that into like because if you're just working with something like where you don't have access to, like you can see the design, but you don't have access to like under the hood like you're doing here. It's you're kind of guessing like I don't know what font this is. You know what I mean? I just have to find a font that looks super close to what I'm seeing on the screen. Versus here, you actually have like the name of the font, the color, the dimensions of the element.
Yep.
That's valuable. I can see why all of that would be helpful.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the shading, everything, border radius, whatever, it's all there. So you're not just guessing to get to the right dimensions.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I think that so when I would use this, if I'm working with a client, a lot of the clients that I work with, a lot of times they're not overly concerned with design in the beginning because a lot of them are just getting started, and they want. I encourage them. I don't know if they want. I encourage them to focus on their, like what problem they're solving versus like getting overly concerned with the look and feel of their application, which is, kind of a bias on my part. I'll admit that. But I see a lot of people getting super caught up with like, no, this can't be released as an MVP until it's like pixel perfect. I'm like, you don't even know what you're building yet. Right. Like you got to get some feedback before you really go deep on design. Uh,
So I
Go
have,
ahead. Disagree with me if you want. I'd love to hear the other side of this.
there's like psychology behind handing somebody something that looks shitty.
Fair enough.
So having an MVP, if you had two people that had the exact same product as an MVP and one looked sexy and the other didn't, the one that was sexy would succeed if they did
Right.
the same thing.
If they did the same
So
thing.
sometimes just getting validation. I live with a PhD level behavioral psychologist, and I built an app for her. And she literally wouldn't look at it until it was aesthetically pleasing. She wouldn't even test it, and it was built for her. And I love her to death, and I'm fairly certain that she loves me as well, just as much as I love her. But she was like, "No, this is too ugly." And it was literally, it was like it was like an MVP. Or like, but I was like, we're just trying to get some validation. I want to make sure it makes sense. She was like, "Sure, I'll do that as soon as it doesn't look so shitty." And
Okay.
and it was, so there's some, your MVP can't be completely ugly, but you can also wait to get fine designs until you're like on your way to being a unicorn. So there is some trade-off there, and I think that having at least some basic design concepts or principles or following some style guides is handy when you're doing early work, right? And so I would never tell a client like that what I just showed you, right? We haven't handed this off to a designer yet because she's still on her MVP, so we're not going to hand it off to a designer. I'm going to just spruce things up a little bit, get some feedback from her, and she's going to go collect feedback. And the plan is that once she hasn't figured out a set number, but her plan is that once she has a set number of users, and we're seeing like a regular influx, then she's going to drop money on a designer who will come in and revamp everything.
That's fair enough. And I
So
think
the projects that I've worked on wireframe projects and I've worked on revamped projects. So projects that are already in market. I mean, that's what it's how my day job is right now. We're at EcoMap, we're revamping our entire product. And it's, we have a 2-person design team for that. And we build from their Figma designs.
So you have a day job and you're also freelancing Bubble projects on the side?
Yeah, correct. Bubble, Xano, Thunkable. Yeah.
And you're on Xano too.
Yeah, I'm a Xano partner. Yeah.
Oh my God. I just literally got deep into Xano in the last like 2 days, and I regret not doing it earlier. It's so easy to work with.
It's powerful.
The documentation, like it just automatically creates API documentation as you're building tables and fields and stuff. Like I'm super impressed, and I'm gonna wind up moving off the Bubble database because of how much I love Xano, and I'm hoping that what they call not tasks, the functions. What is it when you're Yeah, I'm hoping that those run faster than Bubble's like API workflows.
Oh man, John, we're getting into a whole nother topic. Let me just tell you, they do. They run so much faster. It's ridiculous.
I could probably, I mean, I'll set up probably some more time to talk to you about this. Wait, when you say Xano partner, you mean like you're a you're an owner of the company, or you partner with them?
Partner with them, work with some of their clients, and I'm like an official Xano freelancer.
Oh Jesus. Okay. Yes. I'm so glad we did this. All right. Cool. Can we revisit the Xano topic, because I have a lot more to say on there, but I want to get a little bit deeper in my process with it, so I can ask you like smarter questions around like the when to move off of the ball, in the same way that like I want to know like why somebody would use Figma, and you've answered that question for me very thoroughly today. I want to know when is the right time for someone to move off of the native Bubble database and into Xano, and I found that point. But I want to be more familiar with Xano so we can have that conversation.
Oh man, Bubble's database is so sweet for so many use cases. It's such like a perfect pairing with Bubble. But yeah, you just start hitting those edge cases, and sometimes you just got to move off. Sometimes it has to do with like the reality of things. Maybe you're located in a different region than Colorado. You might live in the EU and you need to have your data stored there. You might live in Canada. For example, one of my clients lived in Canada. Their primary client base was Canada, Canadian schools that were storing data about school children. And if Bubble was located in Canada, it would have sufficed. But to get a Canadian instance was like, it's like $1,600 a month or something crazy, to have a dedicated instance that lives in Canada. So instead, what we did was build out a Firebase backend for that project.
In Xano, right?
No, Firebase.
Firebase.
Just thinking about when people need to come on. Yeah, so I do some traditional coding as well.
Gotcha.
So just build out a bunch of microservices and a Firestore, Firebase backend for a Bubble app. It's far easier to do in Xano. That's for sure.
I definitely want to.
But yeah, you're going to hit edge cases, and sometimes you got to move off. But I think for the majority of users on Bubble, their database is perfect.
Going back to something that you said before around design, I'm curious as to, have you ever gotten that reaction from other people? I think you said it was your wife who said that I won't use this because when you make this prettier, I'll use it. Have you gotten that reaction like more than once?
Yeah, mostly with like professionals, people who are there's like 2 classes of app builders, and often there's two classes, and you're building an app to support a business, or you're building an app to be a business. The individuals that I've worked with that are building an app to support their business are often far more concerned with what it looks like in the beginning than the individuals that I've worked with that are building in business with their app. Because they don't need the validation. They've already got validation. Like, shit, no, I know I need this. This is because we're doing this because we needed this.
Fair.
Versus saying like, oh, I have an awesome idea for an app. I wonder if anybody will buy into it. These are people who are like, oh, I've already got the market fit. I need it to not look like shit because I want my employees to use it.
Yeah.
Those customers are far more concerned with what the app looks like on V1 than the people who are just building for the app from an idea and hoping to find users.
Do you ever find that you can kind of start that process and elicit feedback from just the Figma design or just the Webflow design? Do you ever put that in front of people, or is it always like this needs to be functioning and, you know, like in bubble in order for us to show it to anybody?
I guess it depends on what you mean by show it to people. Do you mean show it to end users? If we were talking about like showing it to the end users, they got to have something that's usable. I haven't done any like major market research, but I'm sure if I was working with like a Fortune 500 company, they might like do like focus groups maybe. But yeah, with where they just show them like Figma designs and they're like, hey, we're thinking about this app. What do you think? Whatever. But in general, no, I think that you want to have some kind of usable demo.
Okay.
And even that could even be made in Figma, like I just showed you. You know, you can put together that your wireframe and wire it up, but you got to have something.
That's exactly what I mean. Like, can you do like? Does it have to be like the first?
Oh, sorry. Yes. You could definitely do it in Figma like that.
Okay, and that I love. I was hoping that you would say that because I always thought that like Figma is like you can make it pretty enough to where people think that is a real working functional application, even though they're just navigating through pages. And I think that even that is like enough to get feedback on whether or not are you really solving a problem that people care about. Like, what kind of reaction do you even just get from enabling them to click through something before you start going in and building super complex workflows that, you know, demonstrate the functionality that you're going to need. I just think that's a better starting point because it's lower effort.
Yeah, I agree. I think that Figma was easier to learn than Bubble. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I learned how to do those interactions like 3 weeks ago, and it took me 20 minutes tops. You know,
man.
I didn't realize that was a thing. And somebody was like, you should just do your UI in here. And I was like, okay, that instead of just talking through it. I was like, wow, what an awesome thing. And it couldn't have taken more than 20 minutes. I mean, like, let me show you, because I'll teach you. Let me teach you right now, John.
School me, please. Because this has been like an intimidating thing for me. And I don't know why I'm so scared of Figma. But I have to get over this.
You say like, I just created this, right? And say I'm like, I want to go click this button and this should take me to my home screen, right? And so it's literally like you hit this prototype tab, you go to your element and you'll see this like white ball, whatever. And the idea is, as far as like clicking, is that.
Oh my God, that's it.
Now, if I where's my iPhone 8? We'll highlight it. We'll click play. And boom, I just created an action in my Figma, you know?
Yeah, see, like that, you can get away like showing people that.
And you can choose different interactions. So you could do in Bubble, you'd be a lot more to have like hovering actions, or like while you're dragging, mouse entering and leaving, touching up and down. You can use it to navigate. You can swap stuff. A open an overlay, so like a pop-up, for example, and you can really make it look like you're on a website or web app.
Now, do you have any experience with Webflow?
Yeah.
Is there any reason why you would choose Figma over Webflow or one way or the other?
Yeah, speed. It's so much harder to design in Webflow than it is in Figma. Webflow is certainly not a drag. You don't even have the option of like dragging a square to be where you want it. You have to figure out like the CSS for it.
So there's definitely a higher learning curve to Webflow, it sounds like.
Yeah, I would say so.
And
I would
and
say
I
so.
and what I normally hear is people say like, oh, that's the like what you can like you're actually building a website with Webflow and you can build like search engine optimization on it, whereas Figma is probably not the case.
John, I've got a guy mowing my lawn right now. I'm sorry, and I'm gonna ruin his lawnmower. Give me like 30 seconds to go pull something out of my lawn that
All right, no problem, man. No
way that
problem.
he can see right now. I'm sorry.
You're good.
Sorry.
So what I've heard, I'm just going to chat while Jared comes back. My understanding is that Webflow is also, and again, I don't know this because I'm not familiar. I'm not intimately familiar with either tool, Webflow or Figma. I've tried them out, but not really gotten too deep with it. But Webflow is more for like beautiful websites, much higher learning, longer learning curve. It's harder to learn, takes more time. But you can really build some SEO directly into Webflow, whereas Figma is pretty much like just the design tool, and I don't know that you can build SEO for it. Jared, you good, man?
Yeah, all good.
So I don't know if what I'm even saying is true, but that's like the impression that I get from it, and from what I've like read on blogs and stuff.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Just that Webflow would be useful for creating a very beautiful website that you can build search engine optimization on. And Figma is really more for wireframing.
Yeah, I wouldn't use Figma to. I mean, you can't really host a website from Figma per se.
Right. I think that's like if there's any more questions, I have you've answered all my questions. If there's any other questions, throw it into the chat around design or Figma or even Xano. If you want to talk about Xano, I think I'm like super pumped to talk more about Xano, but I think we'll leave that for another day.
Yeah.
But if there's any questions, throw it into the chat. One of my last thoughts here. Let me see if I got all my questions. Just that, like, is there any reason that you would not start with Figma? Is there any reason that you would go, like, say, for example, there wasn't any collaboration part of what you were building? Would you find it faster to just build it in Bubble so you don't have to like essentially do it twice? Or is that like always your process to start in Figma?
No way. It depends on what I'm doing. If I'm building like a page, I'm probably like the worst plugin builder, but if I'm building like if I'm building a demo page for one of my plugins, it's just always really ugly. Usually just like components crammed around on the screen. I don't really care. If you want to buy it, you'll buy it. If you don't, you don't. It's fine. That's my philosophy on that. Any of like my personal stuff is usually pretty ugly. I actually just had my webpage redesigned because I didn't like the way that it looked. Because I had designed it and I was like, God, I need somebody else to do this for me. And he did, and he exactly just like what I showed you or like what we would do for Webflow or for Bubble. Like this is my website design. And so I just built that out over here. Same idea. It's just a lot of like recreating the components, following like margins and padding. Yeah.
And you can kind of see even that like the like that the second one you showed us was your
Was the
site
actual
hosted on
website.
Bubble, right? And that was
Uh,
like,
this is actually on Doric.com.
oh, gotcha.
Yeah, but it's like the same idea. It's just like it's a row and column builder. So this is very just like a Flexbox environment. It's actually harder to build here than it is in Bubble, but it's the same idea. You know, just dropping in rows, columns, putting in the components where they need to be, and then when it's in the column or the row, finding like this, for example. I did a lot of this, like this text and this text go in a column that's in a row, and here's a column and here's a column, and then this column has some spacing on it. You know, so it's doing stuff like that over here, and it's the exact same approach that I would take in Bubble, where I would start by laying out the rows and columns based on. I always start my page is always a column. I always add a row, and then from in there you start adding more rows and columns to get to the final design. And I just do it section by section, generally speaking. So usually when you get a Figma design or any design, you can almost always find a row of stuff, a section, if you will. It's how most web pages are built. And like that's your first row in your screen column. And you start building like that.
Good stuff, man. All right. Well, Jared, thanks again, man. This has been super helpful for me. I hope other people take some valuable information away from the chat as well. Definitely would yeah, appreciate it, and you know we'll chat soon, man.
Hey, thanks for having me, John. Have a great day. See you soon.
All right, take it easy.
Bye-bye.